Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. On Sunday, March 7th, 1965, about 600 peaceful civil rights marchers were attacked on the Edmund Pettus Bridge as they left Selma, Alabama on a 50-mile march to the state capitol in Montgomery to demand their constitutional right to vote. They were set upon by Alabama state troopers and Dallas County posses armed with clubs, cattle prods, and tear gas. The marchers were beaten and bloodied. On Tuesday, March 9th, a second march was led by Martin Luther King. Again, troopers, sheriff's posse, and demonstrators confronted one another at the bridge, but when the troopers stepped aside to let the marchers pass, King turned around and led the marchers back, afraid of a trap and seeking the protection of a federal court for the march. On Sunday, March 21st, 8,000 demonstrators left Selma under federal court protection. President Johnson had federalized the Alabama National Guard, sent 1,000 military policemen and 2,000 federal troops to escort the marchers. On Thursday, March 25th, 25,000 people stood at the steps of the state capitol where King delivered the speech, "How long, not long." He told the assembles, "I know you are asking today how long it will take. I come to you this afternoon, however the moment difficult, however frustrating, the hour it will not be long." Joining us to discuss the meaning of the Selma marches a century and a half ago and today, and to talk about progress made and promises unkept of Martin Luther King and the courageous men and women of those marches, of the Ava DuVernay film Selma, is Dr. Ronald Daniels, a distinguished lecturer at CUNY's York College. Dr. Daniels has been involved in significant social and political movements over the last 5 decades, was an independent candidate for president in 1992, served as Jesse Jackson's deputy campaign manager in 1988. He's a frequent guest on local and national media and has hosted his own television talk show. Professor Daniels, thank you.
Well, it's great to be with you.
One of the things that you do for the last couple of decades, personally, and the last couple of years with students, is take them down to Selma. Why? What is it about Selma that resonates for you and certainly is now resonating throughout the country with the movie Selma?
Well, I go because of a sense of renewal, because when you do this work, and I'm often asked this, because I'm a long-distance runner. I've been at this a long time. And this is very difficult work, painful work very often. You have few victories, but most of the time you have disappointments. And so people say, what sustains you? Well, what sustains me is a sense of history. So I go back to Selma for a sense of renewal. Every time I go across that bridge, I'm experiencing what those marchers experienced. Because when you go to Selma, it is a total experience, not just a bridge. They have a mock trial, around Jimmy Lee Jackson. There are all kinds of activities.
Unarmed black young man who was killed by a state trooper.
That's right, and this is shown in the movie, by the way. And then you have some of the people who actually went across the bridge, the foot soldiers. Obviously every year fewer and fewer, but some of them are there, those who went across the bridge. Ooh. And then when you talk about someone like Amelia Boynton, who was in the movie prominently, played a prominent part, she's still alive. She's 106 years
living
old
history.
Now. Right, and she's still vibrant and strong,
Man, tough folks.
And so that's why I go. And so when I went to York College, one of the things I talked to President Keyes about was my dream, my aspiration of being able to take a group of students to Selma. So 2 years ago, for the first time, took a small group of about 9 students, I think. And President Keyes, who by the way is of Jamaican origin, had never really been to the South herself.
Wow.
You know, and so she decided to come, which was an incredible honor, played a role. She was able to speak at the Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King Unity Breakfast and whatever. And the students loved it.
Ooh,
because what happens there, let me just tell you what happened that year. This is the same year that the Supreme Court gutted
the VRA, the
that's
Voting
right,
Rights
the Voting
Act.
Rights Act, took Section 4, basically killed it, right? So who's in Selma but the lead counsel, the AGBO, from the leadership, not leadership, the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. He's there. And the president, Cheryl Eiffel, is there. They get a chance to interface with him. It is also the year that Biden comes because he's anxious and wants to talk about support for the Voting Rights Act. And of course, Eric Holt is there.
Right.
So our students, and there's always somebody. I mean, John Lewis comes every year. So what a great place for students to be. So this year, so the 50th anniversary, we're hoping to take anywhere from 30 to 40 students from your college, you know, to the 50th anniversary. And I understand also the Student Senate from CUNY is also going to take some students. And this is going to be just an
What about faculty?
amazing. Well, faculty will be going too. I mean, we got chaperones and others who will be going too. And more and more people
I mean,
are
is
now,
this by invite only?
No, you can go, but I mean, I got to tell you better get on board quick.
Okay.
Simply because I got to tell you, I mean, I was shocked that, you know, I go every year. So
I would think it's going to be huge.
It's going to be huge, and we couldn't even get space several months ago. It's a small town. Every hotel was booked, so we're really staying.
Black people will be allowed to be in the hotels.
Hey, that's when I hear some young people say, well, the generation failed, so forth and so on. Well, of
Come
course,
on.
you know, there was a time you couldn't even get a hotel.
You couldn't eat at the lunch counters. I mean, as a young white blue collar guy from Queens, we saw that on television and we saw the photographs. So you lived through it. And we'll talk a little bit about TV and the civil rights movement, and particularly about Selma. You've seen the movie.
Right.
Your reaction to the movie. I mean, it's been
powerful. And it's, you know, people are going to debate, as people usually do, different aspects of it. And there have been movies like this that people debate. My whole thing is, particularly for this generation, and even for people in general, it captures a sense of a people's struggle. It situates that struggle within the context of American history. So when Oprah Winfrey has to stand there and you know tries to register to vote, you know, after in fact all of the trials and tribulations that that we have had gone through, and she has to be put through this experience, and then to see the 4 little girls, you know, who were born in the basement of Birmingham and all of that. I mean, it really gives people a sense of the history of what's behind this vote. Because quite frankly, even today, in general in America, I say the biggest political party is not the Democrats, it's not the Republicans, it's non-voters. There's an apathy in general because in this country we make voting far too difficult, but that's a whole nother, we could come back and talk about that. But for black people, you know, the whole...
Excuse me, I think that's central. We will come back and talk about that.
Yeah, but you know, here you have a situation, you know, quickly, where you have the Emancipation Proclamation, you have a Reconstruction period in which black people not only have the right to vote, but have the highest number of black elected officials at any time other than the present. They exercise the vote. But that vote was taken away. And it was taken away by, you know, Southern segregationist forces under terror, all kinds of pain, as you could see. And so now this is the second time trying to fight to get that vote back. And for a generation of young people who may be apathetic about it, and to hear older people complaining about, well, you don't understand. Well, there's nothing more powerful than the visual experience of seeing what that vote was all about. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't problems that we ought not to deal with, that we should deal with contemporarily, but at least it is good to see that experience. And I got to tell you, in that theater, I mean, there were families. It was quiet. You can almost hear a pin drop. I mean, this was one of the most...
It was church.
This was a powerful, powerful experience. And then it's a civics lesson. So it's the kind of thing that you say a teachable moment. You can do like teach-ins around this. You know, you're from the teach-in generation.
Excuse me. I've been taught in and have taught in.
So you see here now, you know, because in the progressive movement, we talk about what Roosevelt did. You know, Roosevelt, you know, famously saying, you know, I'm on your side, but you got to go out there and make me do it. And in another context, you might imagine A. Philip Randolph, with the first March on Washington, by the way.
Yep.
You know, the interplay that he might have had with Roosevelt about the whole question of, you know, the war and would blacks participate, and the question of the Fair Employment Practices Commission that came out of that, because he was threatening a march on Washington and to withhold black support for the war. So here you have this dynamic interplay, which is the real stuff of history.
Yep.
You know, between Johnson and Martin Luther King and all the different forces here, the interplay of forces that are out here trying to figure out how to move this thing forward. And Johnson's he's exasperated. He's got all these other things to do. And King says, we can't wait. We're not going to wait. And you have the whole question that very often is not explored. And one of the scenes Johnson says, the whole world is watching us.
Yep.
You see, one of the things that doesn't often get talked about, there's this internal struggle that's going on. But there's also a Cold War. The United States of America is competing for the allegiances of people throughout the world. And how could you say to people in India and China and Africa that they ought to be on the side of the United States of America if they could see the images of black people being beaten in Birmingham and in Selma? So Johnson is saying, the whole world is watching. We have to do something. This is like, we cannot, you know. So he's forced, but he's forced, but he wants to do, but he's also got this other agenda.
Sure.
And so that's real stuff.
And sitting in the theater, quite different theater than the one you sat in, was the same thing. It was packed. There were black and whites. There were families. It was church. And every once in a while, you could hear people sucking in air. Particularly the bombing scene is just devastating. And she plays it perfectly. Here are these girls talking about their hair coming down the stairs. Very, very, very powerful stuff. Now, what does it mean? What does the movie tell us, and what does Selma tell us today? Are there lessons? Are there themes? What does it say to you? What ought it say?
Well, it says several things. Number one, I think people should understand that in the broad sweep of the civil rights movement and in the history of this country, Selma was and is a defining moment for democracy. Because before that time, I mean, there were very, very limited black elected officials throughout the South. Selma changed that dramatically. But one of the lessons to be learned is, and contextually is, that the vote was taken away once. It can also maybe not be taken away, but there are certainly ways in which it could be diminished. And we see some of that being played out now with these voter ID laws, with all kind of ways of trying to restrict the vote.
And also cut back on the hours voting and everything else. Go ahead.
And again, within the context of America having the lowest voter participation of most any Western democracy. But first of all, we need to give history its due. This was a defining moment because now black people had, and Eisenhower said this, by the way. Eisenhower, who was not the greatest advocate and so forth, he said, but you know, if we can get black people the right to vote, it will change things. So there has been significant changes because black people could get rid of a Bull Connor. Black people are now in positions of power in many places around the country. That was not the case prior to Selma, Alabama. It also says that the words of Frederick Douglass ring true. Power can seize nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. That, in fact, there is no progress, by and large, unless there's a struggle, that you really have to work for it. And that the struggle is often long. See, the thing that the movie is not able to capture as much as it ought is the protracted struggle.
Yep.
Selma is a moment in which things come to a head.
It's only 3 months.
Right, you know, but there's all kinds of stuff going back to the 30s and the 40s.
And then you have the bus boycott.
All of these different things are playing out in one of the most incredible moments in American history. And also, by the way, the intersection of the engagement. You know, and I'm a former executive director of the Center for Constitutional Rights, and I can recall, you know, someone like Arthur Conoy talking about, you know, going to the South and what it meant for thousands of young white kids,
Sure.
you know, to go to the South, to be involved in the Mississippi Freedom Summer and all these different things, you know, and how they were in fact like converted, and many of them are still on the front lines, you know, struggling today. But it also says that, you know, the vote was important. But it seems to me that when we look at today, it says that we have to continue to struggle. We have to continue to work in order to finish that which was not only Selma, but the dream and the vision of Martin Luther King. So in a way, you can talk about beyond the bridge. Beyond the bridge, what lay ahead? And for King, beyond the bridge was the question of economic justice.
Yep.
And so you look at King, you say, first phase King, the walls of apartheid, breaking down the walls of apartheid. You know, 1964 legislation, Civil Rights Act. Then the Voting Rights Act. But then he was moving for the big challenge now. The big challenge now, he was saying, was economic equity, beyond the bridge, if you say. And when we look at it today, where there's a tremendous amount dealing with the issues that are still going on in terms of inequality in America, the issues of police violence and police terror that's going on in many communities, the police killings that are creating so much turmoil. But one of the things that, you know, I think King would be talking about is not only that, the need to address that, but the underlying circumstances that is provoking that. In the not provoking that people are policing a condition, but they're not dealing with the condition. That is to say, the whole question of economic justice, economic inequality is an underlying reality. Because at the end of his life, King was talking about an economic bill of rights. You know, everybody would have health care, everybody would have housing, everybody would have education, everybody would have a, sort of building off Roosevelt's four freedoms, everybody would have a basic minimum wage, for example. And because I think his dream was, therefore, to have a society in which it was whole and healthy. And so, therefore, you would not have a need for the kind of policing and the kind of occupation and the kind of, you know, how do we deal with this crime issue? Because one of the best ways to deal with crime is to have wholesome and healthy communities. So I think this generation can learn from that. I think this generation can also learn from the strategizing that took place.
That was astounding. I mean, let me just interrupt. I mean, that's what I do. I mean, I study strategy and leadership, and the amount of strategizing that went on, even in the movie, she captures it beautifully. There's real tough decisions and real doubt, and they make mistakes.
Well, and the interplay, and the other thing, see, here's the other thing I say about King that few other leaders, frankly, had, is you look at King, and you can count his lieutenants, I don't know how many deep, at least 15, maybe 20 deep. Here was a man,
all substantial men and women.
And here was a human being who was secure in his skin in that regard. So people debated.
Sure.
You know, there was a lot of debate going on about should we do this, or we do that, how are we going to do this? And in his discussion with Malcolm, the inside-outside. Well, Malcolm is saying, look, I'll take the outside here. Let me play the outside strategy.
The bad cop.
You take the inside strategy. You know, and so all these things become important in terms of learning how to move. And the fact that it takes a variety of things. I mean, Albany, if you go back and look at it, I mean, Albany
Albany, Georgia didn't work.
Didn't work because the people there kind of went along, and they were, you know, it's hard.
Laurie Pritchett, the sheriff, was very civil in arresting,
right. You know,
and treated them with dignity, if you will.
That's right. But and so therefore you couldn't get the contrast. You could not get the.
So you have to search for a place.
And of course Bull Connor and Jim Clark were perfect for that particular role.
And Jim Clark is the sheriff of Dallas.
Now, of course, it's brutal, you know what I mean? It's people got hurt, people harmed. But out of that creative tension, you know, which in some ways was devastating and harmful, it shot the image to the world. And today, it's the same thing. I mean, very often, it's even worse today because you have a more conglomerized media. And so trying to figure out, you know, because we've looked at Ferguson because the media was carrying Ferguson night, blow by blow, day by day. Same thing with Occupy Wall Street. But at a certain point, even with Occupy Wall Street, they reached a critical decision about, well, what do we do next?
And what are we after?
Yeah, right.
In a concrete way. That's what King was. It wasn't symbol.
That's right.
It was action.
That's right. And if you look at Occupy, for example, in that sense, there was a kind of a crossroads in which we made a point, which was a great point about, you know, the 1% and inequality. But the agenda to follow through on that, I think, got lost. And not only that, at some point you have to ask yourself, what was King fighting for? Now, King has been using civil disobedience but he's using civil disobedience in order to get the right to vote, which says that the struggle is not a unilateral thing, it is a multi-dimensional proposition, which is something I've always believed in. I have some people, oh, we can't, voting is crazy. Well, it's not voting, it's not just community struggles, it's all of it. It's all of those things. I mean, I think King grasped that in a very fundamental, kind of way.
Just looking at King and how King is looked at, I mean, he is the premier orator of the 20th century America, one of the definers of the American dream. However, what this movie points out, and the reality is, this guy is an organizer. He's an on-the-ground, nonviolent, but totally in your face. This guy, what I find, to me, is they make him too gentle in many ways. This guy wasn't a lamb, he was a lion. He's tough.
Yeah, well, not only that, and I think you see that more particularly in the latter part of his life. But here's the thing that, I'm sure that for King, nonviolence was it's like Gandhi, it's like Thoreau. I mean, it is embedded in his view of it. But as organizers, we step back and say there are strategic and tactical parts of it that we look at. For example, it is in fact the confrontation that the world sees, even if it's nonviolent, at least in terms of the people who are being, that is what really drives it. You see what I'm saying? That is what begins to get the empathy and the sympathy, and people begin to say, well, wait a minute, we cannot tolerate that. This is just more, this is un-American.
Well, TV changed the nature of politics, and the racist Southerners didn't understand that, and King and the Allies understood it perfectly.
Well, they did, and as a result, you get these images and so forth, and that plays out again today. But let me just continue to tease out this point. So today, it seems to be the lesson is that the whole struggle around police accountability is an important struggle. But none of our young people are saying correctly that this is systemic, that it's structural, and they're absolutely right. But if it's systemic and structural, it means that it is beyond policing, which means that you can't, in my judgment, the street pieces become important, and I can predict that in a minute the media will grow tired of it, the media will no longer cover it, and you got to decide what to do. Because what happened with Occupy, just quickly as an example, the media kind of pulled back, and all of a sudden, if it was Washington, police just said, okay, now it is safe to move in and to move the city, move the encampments and so forth and so on, and it went away. There's an election coming up. There are still hundreds of thousands of people, I mean millions of people who are not registered to vote. So the question becomes, can you now take, because what was King dealing with? Policy.
Right.
Over and over again, the question he's asking, what is the policy? Because at the end of the day, whether we like the political system or not, and we need to change it, I'm for democratizing and a whole bunch of other things, there is an arena in which people make decisions. And that's policy. King was talking about what, and they were sitting, remember they're debating which elements, what do we need in the bill? They're sitting there talking, what do we need in it?
And they understood it, that it's power and you have to exercise power.
So if you're looking at around the police accountability stuff, then each local community has got to talk about what is the new policing policy? What are the elements of that policy? What are the best parts of it? And how do you make it as humanistic as possible? And then what are the underlying factors that is driving people to believe that you have to police in the first place? And I have some ideas about that. I think it's disinvestment. I think it's the lack of urban policy. I think it's deindustrial. There's a whole bunch of things. But these are questions that we have to address. And some of those can be addressed in the streets, can be addressed by economic sanctions, but some of them have to be addressed also because we are going to inject ourselves into this electoral political process.
You got to be on the inside.
And by the way,
well as the outside.
By the way, that may mean the Democrats and the Republicans, but you may decide, and I have no problem with this as an independent candidate for president in 1992, you may well want to inject yourself as a third force. But that piece of it cannot be left out. You've got to find a way to leverage that as well.
Okay. This is the problem. And who are the Martin Luther Kings and the Ralph Abernathy's and the Whitney Youngs and the James Farmers and the Andrew Youngs? Are they there?
Well, they may well be, but let me just quickly do at this point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's the other thing that's so incredibly important. is that while King is large, and I think the film shows this to some degree, it shows the lieutenants around it, brilliant,
Yeah.
women and men.
Yep.
But it also,
And the locals.
yeah, and it shows the student nonviolent coordinating committee involved.
And the
in
conflict with this Southern Leadership
but still, they're on the front
Yep.
lines.
Yep.
I mean, you know, James Foreman is no slouch.
No.
You know, obviously you see you know, John Lewis.
John Lewis.
And whatever.
Yep.
So there are many people who are actors. But again, it shows the average ordinary people involved. And some of them were from all walks of life. Amelia Boynton is an educator, you know, and that's discussion that she had with Coretta Scott King.
Ooh.
About she's inspiring her.
Oh man, gives me
Telling
goosebumps.
her
Yeah.
about the history of our people. I mean, that shows you, you know, where people were. So all of the, again, all these elements have to be involved. So King is there, but King is, his genius, his brilliance is, the leader is able to capture the sentiments of people and articulate it in a way that no one else is able to do. I mean, that's the genius.
That's it.
And Malcolm had that to a degree as well. He could take complex ideas and break them down in a way that people could understand and make things move along. So, you know, that's an incredible part of where we need to be moving in terms of also. So today, I'm not sure there is a Martin, there is a Malcolm, there is, you know, some of the folks. I happen to be a proponent of collective leadership. I think to become the leader is the edge into the bullseye. I think we've had some experience that when people are seen, and you saw, that was the other thing. You saw the elements of COINTELPRO, by the counterintelligence program. You saw J. Edgar Hoover.
Oh man.
Kind of stuff, and the complicity of Johnson and some of those people.
Sure. And then JFK and RFK.
Yeah,
before
all in this
Yep.
stuff, using all kinds of stuff, you know, as ways of destabilizing movements and those kind of things. So it is better to have a multiplicity of leaders who then collaborate with each other, as they did to some degree with the March on Washington. And, you know, there were conflicts and debate, and there will always be conflicts and debates. But the important thing is, and King did this well, I thought, here was this tension between the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and SCLC. He mediated that beautifully, which is what we need to do today. I mean, you know, the question is, we call it operational unity. What is it that we can agree on? And sometimes, even if we are in adversarial relationships, if we're achieving this, fighting for the same goal, we can debate, because no one really knows whether or not I'm absolutely right or not. I may not be. So to be open always to new ideas, new suggestions, new ways of thinking about things, you know, is an incredible important thing. And King had it in his ability to arbitrate, to mediate, to bring different forces together. And we need much more of that today, because, you know, a lot of times the rivalries and all of this stuff breaks out, and you see him, you know, being very sensitive, you know, about, you know, I see this struggle going on in your organization. I'm sorry about that, you know, and let's see how we can work together. And eventually, you know, and even beyond that, you know, if the merit of March through Mississippi, you know, here's Kwame Ture and Dr. King. They're debating all the way. He's saying Black Power. King is saying I don't know about it. You know, but they're at least working together.
So the story continues.
A lucha continua. The struggle continues.
My special thanks to Ron Daniels for his insights and analysis of events and people in historic Selma and as portrayed in the movie Selma. Join us next week here on CUNY TV. Excellent. Thank you. I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.